Although most Americans know little about Edward Bernays, his theories and activities profoundly define the tools of mass persuasion and have left deep marks on the social landscape. Bernays sought to reframe issues and create desired images in order to put a product or idea in a more favorable light. In doing so, he helped make it socially acceptable for women to smoke, put Calvin Coolidge back in the White House, and even helped put bacon on the breakfast table. Beginning his career in the early 1900s, Bernays quickly became an influential pioneer in the fledgling field of public relations. This was partly due to the fact that his tactics were effective, but also because he was inherently a publicity man who promoted his ideas. He wanted his theories to be known and debated in the public. Bernays was a prolific writer. He wrote or edited 15 books, 300 articles, and 125 letters to the editor. In each publication, he positioned the public relations professional as the invisible wire pullers of American society, who, in his words, harnessed old forces and contrived new ways to bend and guide the world. A secret to most, Bernays' career was instrumental in molding commonly used strategies in public relations today. Three fundamental principles guided Bernays in his quest for public relations to be a constructive force in the community and to benefit the companies who retained his services. First, public relations must be a two-way street. In his book, The Father of Spin, which details the life and work of Bernays, Larry Tye summarized it this way. On one side, the PR man interprets his client to the public, presenting as upbeat an image as he can. It is equally important to interpret the public to the client, telling company executives what people want and need, and altering the behavior of those executives just as he did that of the public. This point is illustrated in his work with the beer industry in the 1920s. Bernays positioned beer as a beverage of moderation and the drink of choice of American founding fathers such as George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Patrick Henry, and even the Pilgrims. Labeling beer as a beverage of moderation helped counteract the temperance movement's assertion that consuming any alcoholic beverages inevitably led to the sin of overindulgence, and put distance between the beer industry and distilled liquors. On the flip side, Bernays convinced retailers to cooperate with law enforcement to ensure their products were being used responsibly. Bernays' second foundational principle was that a good public relations professional must understand the public mind and how they can be persuaded to think and act differently. To be successful, the PR man must take on the role of a social scientist, drawing on theories from his uncle Sigmund Freud, French sociologist Gustave Le Bon, and Walter Lippmann. In his first published book, Crystallizing Public Opinion, Bernays wrote that the field of public relations is the study of the public mind, and its textbooks for this study are the facts of life. A favorite method of Bernays to alter the behavior of society was the coordination and creation of events, as was the case with the Torches of Freedom event. In 1929, Bernays was enlisted by George Washington Hill, the head of the American Tobacco Company, to break open the untapped female market for Lucky Strike cigarettes. It was taboo for women to smoke, so Bernays enlisted the help of a psychoanalyst to understand the basis of this inhibition and the best way to overcome it. The psychoanalyst responded that Bernays could find a way to connect cigarettes to the challenging of male power. Women could be persuaded to change their attitudes about smoking. Bernays then dreamed up the idea to organize a parade of prominent women, Lucky Strikes in hand, marching down New York's Fifth Avenue on Easter Sunday, a holiday representing freedom of spirit. By lighting up in public, the cigarettes would become a symbol, or torches of freedom for the rights of women. This carefully scripted and staged event was wildly successful, and the newspapers carried the message that women who smoked were powerful and independent. Women responded. From California to Maine, women began lighting up without shame, and the sales of Lucky Strikes were increased dramatically. By understanding the social fabric of the times and relying on research to guide his actions, Bernays was able to smash the old attitudes toward smoking and introduce a new social norm by positioning Lucky Strikes as a powerful and emotional symbol. Bernays couldn't help but be pleased by the outcome. In his memoirs, he wrote, "Age-old customs I learned could be broken down by a dramatic appeal, disseminated by the network of media." The third foundational principle guiding Bernays' theories was that public relations would create a better society. He believed the Council on Public Relations was the prophet and savior of American society. In his 1928 book, Propaganda, Bernays claimed propaganda was a legitimate human activity. In order for society to function in an orderly fashion, it is necessary for the enlightened few to act as invisible governors who mold the choices available to the masses. In Propaganda, he wrote, "Society consents to have its choices narrowed to ideas and objects brought to its attention through propaganda of all kinds. Bernays drew on his work with the Committee on Public Information, also known as the CPI or Krill Committee, during World War I to refine his views on propaganda. Bernays was a foot soldier commissioned to convince the American public that the Great War was necessary and desirable. Essentially, the CPI was a propaganda machine mobilized by Woodrow Wilson to package, advertise, and sell the war as the only way to protect the world from tyranny and make it safe for democracy. The CPI flooded the American media with messages that portrayed the German army as barbarians, whose main objective was to plunder and pillage Europe in a reign of terror. Seeing how successfully the CPI propaganda machine swayed public opinion, both at home and abroad, Bernays returned to the private sector, convinced that ordinary men and women were incapable of rational thought. Still, he saw an opportunity, musing,
decided that if you could use propaganda for war, you could certainly use it for peace.
Bernays used these three principles to create a basic strategy he used time and time again. For Bernays, the media was a critical tool to broadcast his messages. Knowing how to utilize the media, or what he called the world's most penetrating and effective apparatus for the transmission of ideas, was a critical skill. The point, however, wasn't just to get articles published or to get airtime, but to create an event or message that is newsworthy. He described the process of creating news as an overt act to shape the attitudes and actions of society. These techniques and the fundamental theories of Bernays do not involve outright deception, but does require selective positioning, emphasizing the good and de-emphasizing the not so good. Bernays would argue there is nothing intrinsically wrong with this line of thinking, but rather is a reflection of deeply rooted tendencies in human nature. Society is hardwired to present the best angle or put their best foot forward. This is an everyday occurrence of social relationships illustrated in job interviews and dating. However, as Peter Abel, a practicing PR executive, points out in his article, Public Relations, a Manipulator or Agent for the Public Mind, problems start when selective communication is taken to an extreme, or when it crosses a line between filtering and misrepresentation, prudence and lies. Nowhere is this risk more aptly illustrated than the use of propaganda in selling the Gulf War and the invasion of Iraq after 9/11 to the American public and abroad. In World War I and II, the press was a pawn in promoting propaganda during the modern wars. The press essentially worked in tandem with the government to promote military objectives and position the enemy as a threat to the American ideals of freedom and democracy. However, what is not readily admitted is the outright use of dishonesty to achieve support for the war efforts and the media's role in disseminating those lies. Takes, for example, one of the most effective parts of the campaign to wage war against Iraq on behalf of Kuwait, which was the testimony of a 15-year-old girl, Naira, a supposed Kuwaiti refugee. Testifying before a congressional committee, Naira told of witnessing Iraqi troops heartlessly dumping babies out of incubators in a Kuwait hospital, leaving them to die on the floor. The press repeatedly blasted this story to the public, and government officials cited this as an example of the brutality and violation of human rights perpetrated by Iraq. In reality, however, Naira was the daughter of a Kuwaiti ambassador to the United States. It was later confirmed she had never witnessed such events, and the congressional committee was an event set up by the PR firm Hill & Knowlton, hired by the government of Kuwait. Arthur Rose, a former journalist with the Washington Post, who covered the event, was later quoted as saying,
I think that this country would have gone to war, really, certainly not at that point, if it hadn't been for this story, because this was such a powerful story and kept being repeated over and over again.
Importantly, after 9/11, President George W. Bush linked the issues of weapons of mass destruction and Saddam Hussein's connections to the attacks, calling for retaliation against the axis of evil, which was widely reported in the media. Although there was little evidence to support this at the time, and there were those within the government who harbored doubts that later proved to be true, the issue for the American public was clear. Iraq was now a battleground for the war on terror. Polls revealed this prevailing attitude following 9/11, where 70% of Americans believe that Saddam was connected to this horrifying act. Bush enjoyed popular support in his call for military action in Iraq. To sell the war on terror abroad, the Bush administration formed the ill-fated Office of Strategic Influence, or OSI, a month after 9/11. While some OSI actions were benign, such as the explanation of the war on terror through press releases, others were more sinister. The OSI used black propaganda to confuse and challenge the enemy and foreign civilian populations. The BBC reported the OSI planned to plant false stories in foreign media in electronic form, hiding the true source of information. When these tactics came to light, the public was outraged, and the OSI was dismantled, at least in name. The inflammatory propaganda and the blatant use of misinformation is especially troublesome. Not only is it an egregious violation of ethical behavior, the OSI had no way to guarantee the stories packaged for the enemy wouldn't wind up being picked up by the press in friendly countries, or even in the United States. There was no way to protect the world from these viruses of information in the age of global electronic media. In an open democratic society, it is alarming that public relations can be used as a tool of manipulation that acts in ways that leaves the public unaware what is news and what is fiction created by public relations firms for the sole purpose of selling an idea. Ethical public relations can only shine when conducted in the full view of the public. Even Bernays himself realized the potential danger to use public relations for dangerous ends. He formed an ethical framework to guide the profession, which included a provision that professionals should never put his duty to the groups he represents above the duty to society. Where propaganda is used to mislead the public, the good guys have a moral responsibility to fight back. They also have at their disposal the same strategies to counteract lies with correct or more complete information. Unarguably, Bernays deserves to be heralded as a preeminent figure in the history of public relations. He helped formulate what Stuart Ewan, author of PR, The Social History of Spin, termed the fateful marriage between theories of mass and individual psychology and the designs of corporate and public persuasion. Bernays was the first to link products to celebrities and recruit them as spokespeople. Additionally, he initiated the practice of product placement in the movies, both of which are now common tricks in the modern trade. You can't turn on the television, open a magazine, read the newspaper, or browse the internet without being bombarded with appeals from celebrities to believe in their products or causes. Even an industry as wholesome as dairy sees value in these tactics, enlisting scores of celebrity spokespeople to peddle dairy products in their successful Got Milk campaigns. The life of Edward Bernays was marked by inventiveness that set him apart from many of his contemporaries. But he was also a man of marked contradictions. He promoted cigarettes, which he suspected were hazardous to people's health, even nagging his wife to drop the habit. He violated his own code of ethics that PR men should refuse a cause that is antisocial when he signed on with the United Fruit Company. While he wrote extensively about democracy and the important role public relations plays in democracy, he held a hierarchical view of society. He didn't trust the common man to make wise choices and expressed little respect for their ability to understand the world in which they live. More importantly, however, the fact that his theories have continued to guide the profession since the early 20th century reflects a foundational conceit within the industry. While some, such as James Gruden and Robert Heath, have argued public relations promotes the two-way street of symmetrical communication, where organizations and their public carry on a mutually beneficial dialogue, the public's role in that dialogue, as Ewan concludes, most often is one of having its blood pressure monitored and its temperature taken.